So we're very lucky to have, as a discussant, I have De Rossi from the University of Ottawa, professor in International Development and Globalization School at U of O. Karen Turmel just graduated with a master's from U of O last year. We're lucky to have her. And Joel Ratcliffe is due to graduate any time now. That's right, from U of O as well. And I'm here in Carleton at the Geography department with a specialization in political economy. I'm a PhD student. So without any further ado, I will invite Joel to start with his presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Joel Ratcliffe, and I'm going to be presenting, among other things, some research that I did in 2011 as part of my master's thesis research in Rwanda. The master's thesis I did at the University of Ottawa's CAAS. The title is Oppression or Empowerment, the Rwandan Small Farmer and Government's Big Changes. I'm going to talk briefly about post-development theory, then some critiques of the current reforms going on in Rwanda. Next, I'll discuss my own research with respect to growers' cooperatives, as well as the reasons that we may or may not consider the situation to be cause for concern or celebration. Finally, and finish with some brief conclusions. My research began as a study interested in farm cooperatives, and it became a study of state policies. I previously studied the use of cooperatives in post-colonial states as potential sources of culturally relevant grassroots development, and I expected to do something similar in Rwanda. I soon learned, however, that to study the Rwandan farmers was to study the Rwandan state. I don't have time to go through all this, actually, but I approached my research from what Aaron Zia calls the skeptical post-development perspective. Very broadly, post-development authors reject the premise of the development discourse that suggests that Western-style mass resource extraction, corporate industrial modernization, is the one and only path to raising standards of living and generally advancing society. There are many different perspectives that could be called post-development, but one of the current features of the broad category is that its authors often look to grassroots local movements for development solutions that are culturally appropriate and environmentally sustainable. Post-development authors seek to reaffirm any given community's right to define its own aspirations, leaving behind Eurocentric conceptions of programs of development. This last point is a crucial one for my research. A proponent of post-development may be wary of agricultural modernization in general, but she or he has no right to contradict a given community's aspirations. Thus, my study was an attempt to better understand the desires of the rice farmers of the two cooperatives studied. The Rwandan countryside is currently undergoing a process of rapid reform under ambitious government programs to modernize agriculture for participation in national and international markets. The government of Rwanda calls its national development program conciliatory and pro-poor. However, the government contradicts this pro-poor discourse as it engages in forceful population control and favors an emerging middle class in order to mobilize capital and transform the country into a modern middle-income economy. The government is not without academic proponents. David Ruth and Frederick Mutebi argue that the ruling RPF party engages in developmental patrimonialism, which they define as when a ruling elite acquires an interest in and a capability for managing economic rents in a centralized way, with a view of enhancing their own and others' incomes in the long run rather than maximizing them in the short run. They argue that the RPF invests in national production and receives dividends without falling into the corrupt clientelism that's prevalent in many other regimes. The state is also reorganizing rural areas. One principal way they are doing so is through villagization. Although the government has called the relocation strictly voluntary, there are nonetheless harsh penalties for non-compliance. Proponents insist that villagization brings people closer to roads, water, schools, and hospitals, and it removes homes from arable land. Villages also promote income-generating activities such as handicrafts, and they are said to be more secure. However, farming is more difficult the farther away one lives, and many farmers cannot afford to replace their homes. In addition, mixed communities have even been replaced by ethnically segregated ones. The government is undertaking the sweeping land ownership and tenure reform. While this process has been called progressive in terms of women's land rights, Chris Huggins argues that, and you can ask Chris Huggins if he got this right or not, he's here, argues that the mere 5 years given to register all the land in the country creates the potential for land grabbing by state officials. Huggins' research into land redistribution in the Eastern Province revealed serious flaws in transparency and fairness. Even when smallholder and landless peasants benefit from land redistribution, they are not necessarily the main beneficiaries. Policymakers want to professionalize rural agriculture and maximize economic output through forced monocropping and regional specialization. However, central planning does not allow for variations in soil and climate conditions. In addition, diversification and multiple plots are the ways that farmers mitigate the risk of drought, disease, soil fatigue, crop failure, and market fluctuations. And small producers have insufficient bargaining power to properly capitalize in commodity markets. The government wishes to create larger farm units. In fact, officials interviewed by Ann Anselm's, quote, saw no significant role for smallholders in a green revolution within the agricultural sector, despite the fact that they constitute 9 out of every 10 units of production in the countryside. With fewer plots and fewer owners, the weakest are more likely to lose their land. According to Anselm's, policies have targeted the sector that contains the most poor without targeting the poor themselves, and they have focused on growth and output over distribution. Truly pro-poor policies, instead of trying to create an industrial capitalist class of Rwandan farmer, have focused instead on entrepreneurial opportunities for the multitude of family farmers who are self-sufficient and able to produce some modest surpluses. She suggests a system of incentives and access to credit for small-scale entrepreneurs, as well as mechanisms to insure against risk and volatility. To better their bargaining position in commodity markets, Anselm advocates the use of democratically controlled farmer cooperatives, which are the subject of my research. Community trickle-down and growth in off-farm economy can be achieved by properly targeting the lower levels of the peasant middle class, the lower levels, who spend their money locally. Unfortunately, these are not current policies. The common theme here is that many authors fear that much of the rural population will be left behind by any economic advantages that the current policies may bring. They worry that increased poverty and inequality could be source of future conflict. My own research asked to what extent rural Rwandans share this vision of development, what, if any, choice they have in participating in this program of societal transformation, and what are their prospects of being able to mitigate the most adverse effects of these ongoing changes. Rice is a non-traditional crop in Rwanda, but today it is both a nutritious staple and a lucrative cash crop. All marshland is owned by the government and leased to cooperatives, who then eventually allocate a 20 by 25 meter rice block to any farmer who can pay the membership fee. Blocks can be purchased unofficially from existing members, but they're expensive. Members keep about 10% of their harvest, and the rest must be sold through the co-op. I interviewed the members of 2 cooperatives, one large and successful, the other small and struggling. However, the prosperous co-op had many poor members, and the less prosperous one also had some relatively comfortable ones. Thus, the financial condition of the co-op is separate from that of its individual members. So, Cooperative Abuzubikorwa has nearly 3,000 members and 700 hectares, and it has been able to save money and expand its facilities and services since hiring a professional manager in 2009 and becoming debt-free in 2011. Female members are a slight majority, many of them widows. Federica is a modest organization of 244 members, women also being the slight majority. At the time I was there, the organization was suffering from mismanagement problems, yet farmers were able to get a comparatively high price for their rice by waiting for seasonal highs. Federica members had access to few services outside of inputs and some loans, but some training was available to both co-ops through a local NGO, which again we may be talking about. Yeah. I conducted approximately 35 semi-structured interviews with members, potential members, and managers. Topics were farming, membership, prices, services, cooperative principles, social benefits, women, threats, and development, and other, I suppose. I found that, while Cooperative and Costa Rica were not grassroots social movements of any kind, capable of resisting any adverse political forces or of reducing inequality, they were, however, able to provide food security. They were almost able to provide food security and lift members from poverty, as many families were able to achieve some small surpluses from rice production. Both cooperatives, however, were great sources of personal empowerment, pride, solidarity, community, and they provided members with markets, services, expanded activities, and much-needed infrastructure. The prospect of modest increases in standards of living seems reasonable for group members, especially if Cooperative, where access to services seems to be improving. But my fieldwork left me with a lasting sense of ambivalence. Given the national program of rural transformation, I began to wonder if this kind of farmer co-op, where all production must go through a central marketing organization, was the means by which farmers could prosper amidst new policies, or whether it was a means by which policymakers could eventually eliminate the small farmer altogether. On the one hand, co-ops could be a brilliant solution to the problems presented by critics of rural reform. Group selling shields members from exploitation by low-paying traders, and it gives producers access to larger markets with better prices. The co-op's provision of inputs and loans reduces risk exposure in crop specialization, which include market volatility, drought, floods, and disease. As producers lose the crop diversity that traditionally acted as their own crop insurance, the cooperative's provision of market information and basic safety nets means that members have an increased ability to weather difficult times. The larger co-op, Cooperi, was able to provide its members with access to non-emergency credit, which gives local entrepreneurs opportunities that they would not otherwise have. The larger farm units of the cooperative model also allow peasants to comply with government campaigns to collectivize, specialize, and professionalize agriculture without dramatically altering existing land ownership or production methods. Moreover, the institutionalization of such democratic community enterprises could potentially create the foundation for a future society more capable of representing its interests politically, which might be a pipe dream, but there it is. On the other hand, cooperativization could also be merely a phase in the dispossession of small farmers, as Anselms has suggested the government may desire. Co-op members are not enacting change, they are complying with it. The current rice cooperatives were created as part of government's reorganization of land ownership to modernize agricultural output. Bureaucrats in Kigali dictate both what is grown in the marshes and how the farmers are to be organized. The government has decided at present to collectivize the marshland to smallholders only to the point of farmer-owned cooperative enterprises, where an individual retain quasi-ownership of their plots, and the farmer members overwhelmingly support this current arrangement. However, given the farmers' total submission to government policies, as well as Anselm's observation that most government officials saw no significant future role for smallholders, the security of the situation is certainly questionable. As long as civil society has little or no capacity of resisting harmful policies, their future will remain uncertain. Instead of these two extreme options, I often fall back to cautious optimism. The members of the co-ops were themselves optimistic about the future, but they did not expect any great improvements in the near future. The government's practice of arm's-length business development, described by Booth and Mutembi, may leave room for the co-ops to achieve the targets of the restructuring without greatly disrupting rural life. Current policies have created clear co-op business regulations and a functioning legal system to prosecute theft and mismanagement in co-ops, and this has been highly beneficial to the organization's day-to-day functioning. The current trend is for very slow progress, and with co-op members being slightly less vulnerable than non-members. That's kind of slightly less vulnerable is kind of like this lasting kind of impression. So, to conclude, small farmers are being pushed into capitalist food production whether they like it or not. State policies are generally forceful and potentially harmful, but everyone I interviewed was in fact eager for some form of local development. Cooperatives provide a potential means to mitigate some of the risks associated with the movement to market-oriented agriculture. It remains impossible to know, however, whether the co-ops are modeled for smallholder empowerment or dispossession, which is difficult in a thesis conclusion to write. I don't know. Yes, really a deep ambivalence that I never overcame. In the meantime, they provide rural farmers with much-needed access to market functions and services. And finally, I believe overall that farmers' cooperatives are an appropriate model for community economic development in rural Rwanda. That's it.
So we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. So, presentation.
So I did my field research for my master's thesis in Rwanda as well, and it's what I'm going to present to you today. So the title was the local participation process in the cooperatives that are financed by Canada through the Canadian Cooperative Association. So I'm going to go through my study case and my research questions, and just to explain a little more, I'm going to have to explain the differences in the concept of participation and cooperatives for us in Canada and for Rwanda. And I'm going to explain to you the methodology I followed to get to the results I found at the end, and I'm going to conclude with a little reflection and some discussion with you guys. So, as an international development student in University of Ottawa, which is very critical of development, I was wondering why is development so criticized and how can we improve that development. So I wanted to study how to improve Canadian aid, and some of the answer keys were more local participation, and the cooperatives are a good development tool as well. So I had to go more precise, so I chose to study local participation concept. And the study case I chose was one that is coming through Canadian international aid, through the Canadian Cooperative Association that has a local partner called Ugama. And I chose to put them in this shape because the funds come from the top, from CETA, and then everybody has their decision making to do, and then at the end we have some of the cooperatives that are supported by Ugama, the local partner that I decided to study and to go to be a volunteer with them to learn how it works. So the question that was leading my research was in a rural Rwanda where there's several actors being part of the same development project. How is the local participation process articulated, and how does the communities feel about their own involvement in this project? And I had a lot of other questions on my mind. Some of them were, so did the NGOs consult with the population? Did they ask about their needs, about their way of interpreting their own development? Who were the people involved, and how were they different from the ones that are not involved, and why were they involved or not? And did the farmer have access to assemblies where they can meet and debate, and where the discussion open, and did the farmers take the lead in the possession of those assemblies, or did they not? Did the community have access to the decisions process that regulates the cooperatives' activities, and how do cooperatives members feel about their own participation and their own involvement in those development projects? And do members need that they want to participate, or do they prefer to leave that role to the development professionals? So I decided to follow Big's definition of participation concept. So he identified 4 types of participation. So the 4-2 can be considered as a top-down approach. So like the contractual participation that I observed in Rwanda is a kind of participation where there's one group of actors who makes all the decisions, and they just tell the members what to do, what has been decided, and they contract them to participate in the activities already planned. The consultative type of participation is where the majority, it's only one group that takes the majority of the decisions, but they consult other groups. So they have some input of other groups, but they still take the decisions. The collaborative type is where the decisions are taken by a few groups of actors, and they make those decisions through debates and meetings. And the collegial is more of a consensus where all of the actors are at the same level and they make decisions together. Okay, so the International Cooperative Alliance defines a cooperative as being an autonomous association of persons who are united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspiration through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So just keep in mind that definition, and then we're going to compare with the Rwandan cooperatives. So the methodology I followed was to get involved in an NGO there and to take time to absorb the culture, understand the communication modes and all those cultural differences, and to as well make a list of contacts and to prepare some of the interview schedules. And then the last month, I was there 3 months, and the last month was to conduct the interviews. So I had 32 open questions asked to 27 persons. Some of them were professionals who works in the development project, like project managers, agronomists, the cooperatives presidents, but as well I had interviews with the regular members who were very hard to find. And so yeah, I had the questionnaire was open questions, so it was led by the member, by the participants. I had some questions already planned, but I was just following their answers to decide what I'm going to ask next, and I wanted them to lead the conversation so they would be more comfortable to open themselves to me. So it was not so random, because first the co-op's presidents directed me to only some people. They chose me. They wanted me to meet the people they already briefed before or something. So after, when I noticed that, I changed my strategy, and then I targeted the regular members. I wanted to just meet with the regular members, and I wanted to have a variety in my samples. So I wanted to have females, women, men, and different ages. So I didn't know the participants, but I tried to choose them. And the results I found were like the answers the regular members gave to me were very different from the ones given by the development professionals, but the ones given by the development professionals and the cooperative leaders were absolutely the same. So this was the biggest differences. It's why when I present my results, I separate them with the answers from the bottom of the social scale and the answers from the top of the social scales. It's not because I understand the world that way, it's because I saw that there was a very social division, a very clear social division in the cooperatives. And as well, I saw that the interpretation of the Rwandan are very different from ours. So I think that, I'm going to say that later. So the Rwandan cooperatives are not responding to the definition I gave earlier. If we remember the definition I gave, the voluntary membership and the democratically owned enterprise, in Rwanda it's not this case. So the cooperative, as Joel was saying, they're imposed by the state, so they're not a jointly owned group who wants to make a counterpower to the state. They're a tool. It's not a counterpower tool from the people. It's a control tool from the state. So it doesn't apply to the northern definition that we have of the cooperatives. So a lot of members, a lot of peasants, if they don't want to join the cooperatives, they risk of losing their land. So they don't have a choice. If they want to keep their land, they have to join the cooperatives. And we see that the social scale that we see in the communities is very well transposed in the cooperatives as well. So we can see that there is a very distinct social scale, and it's very hard, it's very hermetic, and it's very rigid, so it's hard for the people who are at the bottom of the scale to move up in the hierarchy. I'm not going to say it in English. So, the development professionals from Gamma, they really know what we want to hear, they really know the development vocabulary and the bottom-up philosophy that we are looking for and that we really like. So they really know what to tell me to convince me that those projects are very participatory. But when we ask them more deep questions, or when we ask them, okay, you say that they are being consulted, but how do you consult them? How do you do? So then you can realize that, okay, when we ask how they consult them, they answer, oh, we just go and see them and we tell them what we decided and what they have to do. So we explain to them what they need to do. So then when we analyze that, we can understand that our interpretation of participation is very different from their interpretation. So this is what I noticed that was most shocking for me. And for CCA, I think CCA respects its own definition of participation because they really trust Ugama, the local partner, and they give them the decisions power because it's the local NGO. They know the reality. They know how it can work in their country. So CCA really trusts them. But I think where the power blocks and doesn't reach the target of the projects is between Ugama and the development professional and the regular members. On the social scale, we had the animators too who receive paid training, and then they restitute this training to the other member of their zones. So those are the ones who they're the ones who have hope to move up in the scale because they don't have very good life conditions, but because they know how to read and they have some skills, they can be chosen to go to those trainings. So they're the ones who are maybe in the bottom of this high stage, but those ones, they don't have access to any decisions. They just do what the agronomists tell them to do, and then they just repeat it to the bottom of the scale. The results seen from the bottom of the scale were, again, it's the people who are never elected as animator. Their craziest dream is to go once in their lifetime, to go and have this kind of training because this would give them some money. This will help them to improve their skills, and this would better their life conditions. But it's a vicious cycle because for them they will never be chosen because they have a lack of education, they have a lack of skills, and the ones who have the power of decisions and the ones who have all the money and the power, they don't benefit. It's like in the global system. They don't benefit from a restructuration and a more equal redistribution. So they don't want to give them workshop to get alphabetized, and they don't want the animators to take turns, so everybody can take turns in going to the paid workshops. So for the bottom of the scale, it's like a vicious cycle. So I saw some differences among the cooperatives too. And just to finish, I'm going to finish with a positive ending. So in Cooperative, I noticed that people from the bottom of the scale, they don't think that they will one day go higher in the scale, but at least they benefit from the cooperative. They consider that being part of the co-op did improve their life conditions, because what is the difference with the other co-ops is that Cooperative, there is a real reinvestment in the co-op. So they have a storage room, they have a truck, they have a lot of reinvestment in their co-op because the president of the co-op is a farmer, so he's a member. We could see compared to the other co-op, this one, when he sees the regular member, he shakes their hand, they know each other, and he really wants his co-op to go and to grow. So the members, even if they don't go higher in the scale, their life condition, because I'm sorry, I just came back from a 6 months in Spanish. They improved. So yeah, their life conditions improved compared to the other co-ops where the president were just corrupted and they didn't redistribute, so the peasants didn't see any advantages of being in the co-op because they didn't have any services related to it. They just needed to pay their membership and they didn't have any redistribution. So when we arrived to Costa Rica, the president was being arrested in front of us because he was just stealing the money from the co-op. So yeah, this is what makes the difference. So I think co-prairie should be an example for the other co-ops. So yeah, I can finish. We're going to have a discussion.
Okay, so I'm trying to adapt this theme of agricultural development to one of the themes of the conference, which is digital communications. And really, I'm asking, and I'm glad that both Joel and Pierre-Anne mentioned some of the more obligatory or coercive aspects of the agricultural reforms. I won't have to go into so many details. I characterize the environment in Rwanda as illiberal, characterized by a fair degree of central planning as well as some coercion. So within an illiberal environment, how does a kind of liberal technology such as this market information via cell phones, that's the project I'm going to be talking about. So first of all, I'm going to ask whether Rwanda is neoliberal or perhaps liberal in nature. A number of scholars have said that it is, that it adopted neoliberal policies, broadly speaking, after the genocide. In particular, it has a very quantitative, target-led approach, where things like the RSP process is linked into the MDGs. So it links with processes and discourses of good governance internationally. But also, this syncs quite well with corporate production objectives, so domestic or foreign capital seeking to invest in Rwanda. Of course, they have certain targets, certain kinds of objectives to meet. And through this technology, the performance contract system, I find that this target-led approach allows for a conjunction of state and capital interests. I won't go into too many details, but essentially the performance contract system, it developed very much as a technology in the West associated with neoliberalism under the New Public Management School. It's all about incentivized work, employment, specific targets in contracts, and rewarding or punishing managerial behavior according to their ability to achieve the targets laid out in these contract systems. Now in Rwanda they call it imihigo, and they've embedded it within a local cultural context. They say it has certain indigenous characteristics. I would question that, but I won't go into details. But the really interesting thing about the Rwandan example is that it's not only applied to state agencies and to local administrators, but even at the household level, people are asked to sign up to specific kinds of targets, how many hectares of a certain crop they're going to plant, how much fertilizer they might apply, etc. But also at the district level or the sector level, some of the sector level targets for production of maize, for example, might fit with corporate production targets for agribusiness in Rwanda. So that's the technology for merging state and kind of non-state objectives. Very briefly, the Rwandan government broadly has a user pays approach to development, which could be seen as liberal or neoliberal. They've registered land. Again, these are big topics, I won't go into details. And importantly, Joel, you mentioned entrepreneurship. And there is a very strong official discourse of entrepreneurship, which comes especially from Paul Kagame all the way down. He's really emphasized that Rwanda won't get by or won't succeed unless Rwandans are entrepreneurial. However, there are many contradictions. Again, I won't go into too many details because Joel outlined some of these very nicely. In the areas I studied, I looked at 2 districts in Rwanda, and in both of these, to some extent, this is not universal, but it's quite common. People are forced to buy fertilizer. They're forced to plant certain kinds of crops. As Pierre-Anne also mentioned, it's there in the law that if you don't follow the agricultural policy or the land use master plan, the state can confiscate your land. So this kind of coercive architecture isn't just, a few local administrators are getting carried away, as it's sometimes perceived. This is built in, I would say, to policy and legal frameworks. And regional crop specialization is part of this, right? So depending on where you live, you have to grow certain kinds of crops which are approved by the government. Also, again, I think both of you mentioned the sales of crops to certain firms. Quite often, the local administrators will facilitate those kinds of linkages between cooperatives and agribusiness. But the level of choice that's involved in that facilitation is up for question. So quite often, it's kind of a very interventionary model that we see in Rwanda, government intervening in markets directly. I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying it doesn't fit with the liberal or neoliberal model of development. And I think some of these things add up to a desire, if not a reality yet, of a kind of state-facilitated or state-imposed form of contract farming. Mostly through the cooperative model, but sometimes through individual smallholder farmers too, through the performance contracts, which I talked about before. So, this is unfortunately a little bit dated and completely blurred, you can't see it. But this is food crop production in Rwanda. This aggregate food crop production per year across the country. This is the year 2000. You can see it goes up to 2005 here. It's up and down. 2007 is where the agricultural reforms start to take off, and you can see that there's a rise, and that continues up to the present day. So there's no doubt that these kinds of technologies which we've been talking about, and a massive input in terms of fertilizers, improved seeds, and extension technologies as well, it's tripled the aggregate yields for certain crops. It's doubled the aggregate yields for other crops. So undoubtedly, it's having a massive impact in terms of productivity per hectare mostly. But my question is, how are these benefits distributed? What are the geographical diversities within this picture of success? And I think those things are much less clear, especially in the official statistics and documents. So to take a step back now from that reality of the agricultural reform, I want to very quickly apply a governmentality lens to the presentation. Obviously this is a Foucauldian concept, the idea of managing individuals, trying to create a kind of an ideal development subject who is self-governing, who is economically rational. This is very much a Foucauldian idea of a governmentality. That's been extended from Foucault's original writings into an idea of global governmentality, where you have networks of international players, especially international financial institutions, but also the UN is very major in these kinds of things, and bilateral donors. And I would say that the move from the 90s away from aid conditionality towards a discourse, at least, of ownership by recipient states, aid recipient states, ownership of the planning process. They are doing their own PRSPs, more, I guess you would say, kind of active participation of recipient states. I'd say this represents a move towards global governmentality, in the sense that states which are receiving aid have to show themselves to be willing to go along with the international ideas of good governance. They have to voluntarily kind of render their problems and solutions legible to the international calculus. So I'm talking especially about things like the MDGs, but all kinds of indicators around democratization, economic indicators as well. And I'm not saying that there is some kind of a massive kind of scheme of global governance which is seamless and is monolithic, but there are certainly different networks which kind of act together with some friction, I think, to create what we could call a system of global governmentality. And Foucault said that being within this system of global governmentality, or governmentality in general, is very ambiguous, because on the one hand you're an object of knowledge, which is you're forced to subject yourself to give up this information and to put all your issues and your challenges into a certain kind of language, make it legible to the mechanisms of governmentality. But at the same time, as you do that, as you create that knowledge, of course, Foucault says that knowledge and power are interlinked, so you gain power even as you're doing that, and you gain leverage within these systems of global governmentality. I think that the Rwandan example is like a really interesting example because from the start of their post-genocide regime, they have shown themselves to be very adept at working within kind of a liberal or neoliberal discourse within regimes of global governmentality. But of course, they're also quite assertive in the way in which they engage with those. And Kagame certainly has pushed back a lot against donor positions. Okay, so coming now back to the case study, which is digital technologies, especially in the agricultural sector. Rwanda, since about the late 90s, has really embraced e-government, digital technologies of all kinds. And this is usually seen as a means of getting away from a dependence upon agriculture, technological leapfrogging towards a knowledge economy, and that's true. It's also seen as a way of going beyond the complicated land tenure struggles and property rights struggles, which pose a challenge, especially in the kind of millennial period, the 2000s, early 2000s. But I would say that it's also explicable in terms of e-government as a technology which really configures well with global governmentality. So, in other words, by making its laws, its policies, and its data available online 24/7, the government is really, meeting the needs of global governmentality very, very well. But also, if any of you have written any critical articles about Rwanda might know, they have websites dedicated to kind of undermining critical scholars, etc. So it's quite an assertive way of engaging, I think, with what we might call global governmentality. So coming to the case study itself, it's called Isoko. It's basically a system for providing up-to-date, real-time market information for agricultural commodities. Previously, this is before 2009, the government did disseminate information, but there was a big time delay, and they're using faxes and all kinds of different technologies. The World Bank helped them to launch this project in 2009. And what that means is now, basically, anyone with a cell phone can send a text to the Isoko kind of project managers with a code for the commodity they want and the market that they want, the actual physical place, and they'll get an instant response with the price. And that's very impressive. 78 agricultural commodities at 50 major marketplaces around the country. So you can either subscribe as a computer user or as a cell phone user. And it's really aimed at cell phone using farmers. That's the way it's been framed by the government and the World Bank. However, I'll come back to this. Other beneficiaries of the data include the National Bank of Rwanda, Institute of Statistics, and various regional and other organizations. So it's not purely farmers who are using this system. Again, very briefly, it's mostly cell phone driven. You do have to acknowledge that only 30% now of the population own a cell phone. You can see it's a very rapidly growing sector, however. More men than women own cell phones in Rwanda, and on average they're wealthier, of course, than the average farmer. That's not directly relevant to what I'm going to say, but I think it is good to bear that in mind as well. Because the government, there's this quote here about, the second bullet point is from the government. It says that the Isoko project seeks to empower farmers. Right? That's a very strong word, right? Empower farmers to enable them to make more informed market pricing decisions and ultimately become more successful in farming. And this really fits with the notions of entrepreneurship, which, as I said, are coming from the president down. But first of all, we have to kind of ask ourselves which farmers have access to this technology and might be using it. Anyway, in 2011, it won an award. It has a very large digital footprint on the internet. If you Google this, you'll get thousands of hits. It's very kind of popular in terms of worldwide distribution on the net, etc., in terms of its image. However, when you look at the realities, in 2011, there were only just over 27,000 texts received or sent. So that's like both ways, farmers, and then the system sending them out to farmers again. So that's it's actually quite few, right, for a population of more than 10 million now, and most of them are farmers. And I found, when I did an internet search, basically to look for evidence of evaluations, very little actual data on what is happening with this. The data that's available isn't disaggregated by the type of user. For example, is it merchants who are using this? Is it policymakers? Is it primarily farmers? There are two studies which I found which are very useful. I didn't find any official government evaluations of it. Two independent studies, one more qualitative and one pure economics paper. So that's quite interesting. The qualitative paper found that quite often urban, non-farming householders use it when they send their house helps to the market to get their groceries, they make sure that they're not going to rip them off with the prices, so they use it. Most of the farmers, which this person who did this study talked to, didn't really know about Isoko, so it suggests that it's not very well disseminated around the countryside. So there are questions there. Now, the economics paper looked at prices of beans in particular before Isoko was brought in and afterwards. And this is over a couple of years. A lot of data they crunched, and this is a very heavy economics paper published in the Economics Journal. And they found that the prices, the current prices, are not consistent with open market behavior. And this raises the question of whether liberalization policies since the 1990s and more recently this Isoko project have indeed helped in opening up stable food markets in Rwanda. So there are questions. So I want to be clear here about what I'm saying. I'm not saying that this project is necessarily a failure. I am raising questions as to the beneficiaries of this project. I'm certainly not saying that providing market information to farmers is bad, or even using cell phones is bad. But I think this raises a broader question about about the usefulness of these kinds of projects to different actors. So we noted before that banks, institutes of statistics, regional organizations are using Isoko. So I think part of its popularity is that it's actually very useful for these actors who are, again, part of this governmental apparatus, continuously assessing good governance in Rwanda. It also supports Rwandan and kind of broader narratives of market responsiveness and entrepreneurship in Rwanda, so it fits the discourses. But I think clearly that its claims of empowerment should be interrogated, given the scant data that's available. It does raise significant questions. I also want to point out that I'm not just concentrating only on Rwanda, and this contradiction which I would note between the market forces discourse and a very neoliberal discourse, but a reality of more interventionist policies, central planning, etc. This is not completely unique, and in fact, people who study neoliberalism say that the policies are always messier in practice than the theory would suggest. But certainly in Rwanda, I would say that the discourse of a liberal agriculture reform based on commercialization and entrepreneurship is only a tiny part of the reality.